Hello, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Here in Spain is good morning.
Morning. I don't know where you are.
I come from Spain, Barcelona.
Okay, good morning still. Still good morning, isn't it? Okay. So we have 4 presentations, isn't it?
Yes. Shall we, good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, home.
Yeah.
Shall we wait for another 2 minutes for participants to join?
Yeah. So everybody is okay?
Yeah, we are supposed to start at 11:05 minutes.
Okay.
So let us give them 1 minute.
Okay.
And then we start. Yeah.
Okay. So it's here. It's here.
Okay, shall we start?
Yes, please. Yeah. Yep.
Okay, so welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to session number 14, Resilient Thermal Comfort. I am Hanan Khatri speaking to you from Sultan Qaboos University. And with me in chairing this session is Prof. Home, a professor from Tokyo City University in Japan. We have 4 presentations. And before we start, I would like to inform you that we are recording this session. And please, I will ask you to kindly post your questions in the chat box. And you do us a favor if you tell us which question is for which presentation, okay? So let's start with the first presentation about equipment interaction with external shading system in residential buildings of Ahmedabad. Let's go to India with Snowy Christophel. I hope I pronounce your name correctly.
Yeah.
So yeah, over to you, Snowy.
Hi, for CATE, this is Minu. Snowy and I decided that maybe today I could present.
It's okay. Yeah.
So I will share my screen.
Yes, please.
Okay. Sorry. Slightly not a regular user of Zoom. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'll just go to presentation mode. Okay. So thank you very much. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everyone. My name is Minu Agarwal. I am a professor here at CEPT University, and Snowy, who's also present here, was a master's student with me doing her master's thesis last year, which, this paper is the outcome of her thesis work. And also Professor Rajan Raval was also part of this study, setting it up, organizing it. Professor Raval is not here today, but I think you can hear his keynote on Thursday. And so I'll tell you a little more about CEPT University, just so you situate yourself, understand where I'm from. So CEPT University is located in the city of Ahmedabad, where the study is also located. It's in the western extreme part of India, in the hot and dry climate. And it's a university that is centered around natural and built environment and how it affects human beings. Lots of parallel programs that deal with mostly with the built environment. Okay, so I will begin. I think the motivation of the study is immediate and kind of omnipresent concerns now on what climate change has in store for us, where it potentially means more extreme days, more hot days, more cold days for some locations, more weather-related variability, and more extreme days. This is particularly of concern for residents of, some of the more climates that are already extreme. For example, the western state of Gujarat in India, where we are also currently located. And if we look at the city of Ahmedabad, which is the most populous city in the state of Gujarat, had to or has formulated a heat action plan. This happened in 2013 in response to the extreme heat waves that were experienced in the year 2010. So these orange bars that you see here are sadly the number of deaths per day in the month of May in the year 2010, over 300 deaths in a day. And even before and after 2010, it was not any kind of happy situation, over 100 mortalities a day from extreme heat. And so the city reacted with a heat action plan, which had many elements to it, like public awareness, better health facilities, deploying ambulances, so better preparedness for heat waves, and also improving, the building-related infrastructure. So they put in a cool roof project and a roof insulation project, roof insulation-related focus as well, which is estimated that this project has already saved thousands of lives. So in our particular study, we thought, the focus has been on, cool roofs, roof insulation, and we thought of examining what is happening in another, sort of interface element with the outdoors that buildings have, especially the residential buildings, balconies. Balconies are a very common element in Indian residential buildings, and they serve a lot of purposes, like there's an extension, they are an extension of the living space, also an extended utility space. So they are an essential feature that people use actively. Another essential element of balconies, especially in this particular state of India, is most balconies look like this. So most balconies will come with an external shading device like this that people will install on their own money. So not put in by developers, but people will go ahead and install this to increase the usability of the outdoor space and to improve their indoor thermal environment in response to the extreme heat that is very typical of this region. So on the inside, this is how these shades look like. They are covered with thin bamboo members. And on the outside, there's a fabric to provide a greater sun protection and more coverage. And this is a fairly eco-friendly product. It's very simple, manufactured, boosts the local economy as well. So a great feature that people will then, most people will install of their own choice in their homes. And we thought this could be, and this could or should perhaps be promoted as a heat resilience measure, maybe. But before we got into investigating, okay, what is the extent of protection that such devices can provide, I think we had to get into, really looking at, these devices are very much dependent on people's behavior. They are dependent on the occupant to deploy them at the right time. And so before getting into the, their contribution in improving the thermal environment, we thought it'll be best if we first look at how many people are using them, how many people are installing them, and how many people are using them, and how are they using them. So we were interested in patterns of shade movements of these balcony shades, which are very common in this particular part of the country. We also wanted to categorize types of occupants into, for example, passive versus non-users versus active users. And then what are the potential motivating factors for people who are using them? So in what conditions do they deploy them? When are people removing them? And so we were interested in the relationship between what's happening on the outside, whether it be thermal descriptors of the outdoor environment, or some contextual variables like where is your apartment situated, etc. So to summarize what we were interested in looking at, we wanted to study frequency of shade movement. We wanted to look at how actively are people using them, and then the degree of shading that people are choosing to have with these occupant controlled shading devices. And these are some of the factors we thought could be interesting to look at, like how much sun exposure a particular balcony has. That perhaps would be the factor that drives people to use shades more or less. Amount of radiation received on the facade, outdoor air temperature, other environmental variables, and then orientation on which you are located. These two are somewhat related: time of day and the floor level that you could be situated at. Floor level also determines, how much access to the sky and the sun you have, also the kind of view you have. That could also be other factors that could be playing a role in how often and how much people deploy these shades. So how to investigate this? If we look at the literature, occupant surveys is one popular way to see how and when people are interacting with facade elements like active shades. The other is a field study using time-lapse photography. I think these two we found were the most common ways to investigate this. And then if we try and look at what variables people have looked at, again, it was a similar mix of what we were interested in as well. And so, yeah, the main sort of methodology, like we have followed as well in this paper, is to record, these outdoor variables, contextual variables, and see how they are correlated with the deployment of shades. If you look at the literature, the most common type of, or the most prominent feature of the buildings that seems to dictate the usage, time of use and degree of usage of blinds was orientation. So while formulating our study, if we focus here, we identified 4 test buildings in the city of Ahmedabad, where we did we collected information or status of shades by photographing the facades repeatedly. We identified 4 buildings out of a pool of say 10 to 15 based on how feasible it was to commute between these various test buildings, and was there a place where you could actually safely conduct this study. And we largely tried to keep orientation out of the study, because I think existing studies clearly show that orientation has a big role to play already. So we thought, instead of finding the obvious all over again, we tried to find buildings with a consistent orientation. The field study was conducted over the months of February and March, where this is clearly the transition time between spring and summer. For this particular location, data was collected for 25 days, 3 times a day, and overall, Snowy managed to collect shade, position, painted data. So individually, if you count each balcony as a single observation, we had about 4,000 observations of shade positions. So as I mentioned already, we then, out of these images that were collected, we calculated occlusion index. So that's reflective of the amount of occlusion or closure of the balcony shades. And we also looked at frequency of usage. So between one observation to the other, if the occupant made any change in the position or not. Some little other notes. So each balcony did not necessarily have an individual occupant, but the various balconies were attached to different types of rooms. So one balcony to the living room, other balcony to the master bedroom, and then the secondary bedroom. So we have treated each balcony as an individual observation, assuming that different occupants will operate different balconies differently because they are also attached to different function behind the balconies. So overall, the users and all the other calculations that have been done have only been based on balconies which have the shades installed, of course. All balconies that did not have the shades installed entirely are, of course, completely out of the study. Some of the data was not collected in situ or in the field. They were, for them, we have used simulated data. And then we've kind of, most of the analysis is done at each balcony level. So if we get into like a summary of the data that was collected, here are all the buildings that were observed for 25 days. and just a little zoomed in image of each of the balconies. Right, so I think we went over this data already, right? So yeah, not all balconies had shades, so we already figured out balconies which did not have shades. Okay, so now how to calculate the occlusion rate, or percentage of time and degree of closure. So this was kind of based on the literature to keep a continuity in the methodology used. So a score was assigned to the degree of closure of each balcony. So 0 score for completely open and 5 for completely closed. And so this is how the occlusion rate is calculated. So if at a given observation time, all windows in a facade are completely open, then the occlusion index would be 0. And if all the shades, all the balconies which had shades installed were completely closed, then the occlusion index would be 1. Oh, sorry, 100%. So if we look at some of the results we got, these are from the 4 residential buildings, although this case A is a cluster of 5 buildings, but they were all facing the same direction, same neighborhood, same housing society, same construction, same time of year of construction, etc. So kind of clustering that as one data, like one group. So if we group them just by building, we do note some stark differences between the various buildings that
I'm sorry.
Yes, are we already kind of getting to time? How
like
much?
1 minute. Sorry, you got like 1 minute.
1 minute,
to wrap up your presentation.
Okay, sorry, I think I can't see the time like while talking, so I will really try and wrap up. So, I mean, there's clearly something going on, as in different buildings, exhibit different behavior. So certainly some properties of the buildings, for example, depth of balconies, etc., could be influencing and resulting in different kind of shade deployment. Especially, I would say, between buildings B and D, that there's a big difference, even though they have the same orientation. So something else is clearly influencing these results as well. So as kind of short on time here, we looked at several contextual variables also. We did not find a statistically significant difference on the contextual variables, but on some environmental variables like degree, duration of sun exposure, solar radiation, yes, there was significant difference observed on the basis of these factors. We also managed to categorize the occupants in terms of shade frequency. 65% of the occupants were found to be non-users, like for the duration of the study, they did not move the shade a single time. This was done during the time of COVID. I don't think the occupants were missing from their homes. It was just that they never moved their shades. 21% were passive, 14% were active users. If we look at the transition on a monthly level from passive to active, so the red are passive and the green are active users, we do see on a monthly level that the number of active users increases. So I think as we move into the more extreme months, that we will see more and more active users, but given the time constraints, this was the extent of the study. But I think this particular chart is something that is really interesting and something worth building upon further, where the number of active users is going to shift, and that the potential of number of active users is not limited to the numbers we observed here.
Thank you, Prof. Mino. I'm afraid we have to stop here. And now we'll move to the second presentation about thermal comfort in nursing homes, shared rooms, with Nuria Forcada. Over to you, Nuria.
Okay, good morning.
Good morning.
Let me present and share the screen.
Yes, please.
Can all of you see the screen?
Yes, we can. Please proceed.
Okay. So I'm Nuria Forcada. I'm from the Universitat Politécnica de Catalunya, from Spain, from the Group of Research and Innovation in Construction. And today I'm going to present the conclusions of a small part of a project that we are carrying out on nursing homes in Spain. We analyzed the thermal sensation, and we are currently analyzing the implications of energy consumption in implementing thermal comfort models. However, today I'm going to present how residents, elderly people, do perceive comfort compared to adults, and in this case, it's the workers from the nursing home, and which are the differences between the different rooms that we monitored there. As all of us know, thermal comfort is a very subjective parameter and depends not only on the environmental conditions, but also on individual characteristics, such as the age, such as the body mass index, and other parts. Currently, thermal comfort models are based on few studies, but mainly on people around 20 and 65 years. There are some field studies that are studying other groups of population, but there's still room to work on trying to define models, trying to define how children, how teenagers, how elderly people do behave or do perceive thermal comfort. So in our project, what we did was to analyze, in this case it was for the Mediterranean climate, using some nursing homes in Barcelona, Valencia, and Tarragona, and we monitored these nursing homes along different seasons. Here I present the main differences between winter and summer, but we also monitored while it was not heated, neither cooled, so in natural ventilation. What we did was to choose the common rooms, such as the dining room, the therapist room, gym, and living room, where many elderly people were there. We monitored indoor conditions, temperature, humidity, air velocity, and radiant temperature. We also monitored outdoor conditions, temperature and humidity. And while we were monitoring this data, we carried out a survey on thermal sensation, preference, and acceptability. It was good because we had a very simple database where we could also got information about the age of the residents, the weight, and other information such as the degree of dependence, the level of impairment, and so. However, we noticed that some of these values did not affect the thermal comfort sensation. We got around 900 answers for winter and around 650 answers for summer. Some of the results of our study were, as you can see, regarding thermal sensation, if the green bar is the neutral sensation, and red, and we show the residents and non-residents, we can see that both in winter and summer, residents do have more tolerance. It means that the majority of residents do feel a neutral sensation, which might imply that it's a good thermal sensation. However, in winter, it seems that they are more have a tendency on having cold, and in summer they have a tendency on be comfortable. However, for non-residents, for the workers in the nursing home, it seems that they are not such tolerant. They always feel or a bit cold or a bit hot, but do not feel neutral. The same happens with the preference. Residents do feel comfortable, or the majority, so they prefer not changing. However, non-residents are a bit more skeptic or prefer, or they are not so comfortable. And for acceptability, the same happens, but not in a such important way. We analyzed the different rooms to check if there were any significance or any difference between each room. In fact, the main factor that changes in each room is the activity and the clothing, because we noticed that for when residents were going to the gym, they take off their clothes or they adapt to the different activities. Probably it was because the carers, the people who take care from them, force them or ask them to do that. But it's true that they adapt the clothing to the activity. We noticed that in the same way as in a general terms that I showed in the last slide, that even if they are in the dining room, gym, or so, residents do feel more comfortable than non-residents. Normally, in the dining room and the rooms where non-residents do have an activity. So, for example, in the occupational therapy room, they normally organize activities and they ask residents to be moving. It's generally non-residents do feel a bit hotter than residents. So we noticed that there is a difference between residents and non-residents, and also a difference between each or among all the rooms, but at the end it can be related to their activity and also to the clothing insulation. We also created the regression model between the mean thermal sensation both and the operative temperature. And we did it both in winter, for winter and for summer. And we obtained it quite goodness of fit, of regressions. And here we can see, for example, for winter, that in orange, it's the regression for elderly, and in blue is for non-elderly. Here we can notice that the elderly are more, accept more the differences of temperature. They are less sensitive than non-elderly. So a change of indoor temperature is not a big deal for them in winter. In winter, we could see that the neutral temperature, which is when the thermal sensation both is 0, is around 21.5 and 22, both for residents and non-residents. So we noticed that winter when dealing or when finding out the neutral temperature. However, as I told, the most significant result that there is that the sensitivity of elderly people. In summer, we found the same result, that the sensitivity of elderly is lower, so non-residents are or have or notice the temperature more than elderly. Here in this case, residents, we found that the neutral temperature for residents was much higher, even 1.5 degrees than non-residents, so reaching 25.3 degrees, while non-residents it was less than 24. I told you what we found is that activity and clothing are two variables which are important to take into account, and we graphed the activity, the different types of activity against the clothing insulation, also for residents and non-residents. We notice that when we have more when people are doing more activity, they reduce their clothing insulation. In blue is again residents, and in orange non-residents. We can see that in winter residents do change a lot their clothing. However, non-residents not so much. But then if we compare with their thermal sensation boats, are those who are not so comfortable. So clothing insulation should be one, or changing clothes should be one of the main active strategies to adapt to thermal comfort. And mainly in those spaces where different groups of people coexist. And these different groups of people do have different perceptions. So what we can adapt is other personal parameters. Regarding summer, the same happened with with residents, sorry, and for non-residents we didn't get any coherent results because activities were quite similar all the time, so we cannot get any conclusions. We also compared the results from the mean thermal sensation boats, those that we collected in the field study, and the PMB model. We also calculated the PMB values for each of our collection data, and we also graphed both for residents. We graphed both the mean thermal sensation boat and the PMB, the same in winter and summer, and we noticed that there is a similitude. However, again, it seems that elderly people are less sensitive than those which is expressed in the PMB model, both in winter and summer. However, when dealing with the neutral temperature, it seems that the PMV is quite similar to what we got from the field study. So, in a sense, it means that we are not so far from what the PMV model says for that. So finally, as a conclusion, although both groups feel comfortable in a big range of temperatures, we notice that residents are more tolerant to temperature changes, or they do not feel the temperature changes. As a conclusion, it's important that nursing homes should be designed and operated based on the real needs of the end users. So it's important to carry out field studies like this one to check how they must be designed and how they must be operated. However, we can also adapt activities of elderly people and their schedules to take advantage from outdoor conditions and to take advantage of each day of the year. The result of the research, well, it's a starting point, as I told you, of a big project where we also analyze the continental climate. Our aim is to compare different climates and check how or the difference between them, and also to analyze how implementing models based on the real needs of end users can reduce energy consumptions. So the results might help refining guidelines and promoting good practices for designing or evaluating the existing nursing homes regarding thermal comfort and energy efficiency. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nuria. I would like to remind the audience to write their questions. And now it's the time to move to another presentation with Carol Bensfield. She will tell us about the development of a method for the assessment of global thermal comfort based on individual thermoregulatory impacts. Over to you, Carol.
Thank you very much. I'm currently trying to share my screen, but Zoom won't find my PowerPoint, so I'm having a bit of trouble.
Do you want me to share the slides for you?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem. Okay.
Perfect, thank you. So my name is Carol Bensfield, and I'm currently a PhD student at the Technical University in Munich, working at the chair of building physics. And today I'm going to present part of my PhD project, focusing on the development of a method for the assessment of global thermal comfort based on individual thermoregulatory impacts. Quite a long title, unfortunately, but in my dissertation, I deal with all the indoor climate factors, so temperature, air, light, and acoustics. And I'm looking for approaches on how to evaluate them on the basis of physiological variables that are triggered by the indoor climate. So the aim should be to evaluate the indoor climate in the future, not only on the basis of standardized physical parameters in the building, but also to be able to assess the condition of the body individually for each person. Could you move on to the next slide, please? Okay. So therefore, the aim of this sub-project is to develop a method to assess the impact that a thermal environment can have on humans. The focus is purely on the primary effects and only those that can be objectively measured. So with the method that is being developed, one can determine in which thermal state the person is, from which one, of course, you can get a rough estimate for the comfort state, but you don't really get any detailed information about that, but only about the physiological state. Next slide. First of all, I have dealt with the concept of impact, as this is a central concept in my dissertation. If you take a closer look at the definition, you will come to the two terms impact and effect. An effect is basically the result of a certain influence, something that happens because of something else. And an impact, on the other hand, is the effect or influence that something can have on a situation or on a person. So based on these definitions, 4 components can be derived from which an impact arises. So starting from a trigger, a force is caused, which is received by a recipient and leads to a change there. Both the trigger and the receiver are either objects or persons, while the effects and the resulting change are variable quantities. So normally when one thinks of the term impact, one would automatically assume that this is a negative effect. However, according to the definition of the term, there is neither a negative nor a positive relationship. So an impact of the environment always leads to a reaction in the human body, which is perceived both consciously and unconsciously. However, this reaction can either be neutral, positive, or negative. Next slide. The effects of an environment, in particular the thermal environment, can be divided into 4 categories as shown in this figure. So a thermal environment can either have no effect, the person is in a neutral state, or the environment can lead to imperceptible effects. This means that the person consciously does not perceive any change, but the body still has to react in order to keep the body in balance. In third place come the comfort relevant changes. Here the body also reacts to the environment, but the reaction is so intense that the person notices it, and therefore his or her comfort is most likely affected. And in last place are the health endangering effects. So the environment has such a great effect on a person that the body must react to such an extent that it can only maintain this reaction for a limited period of time before have consequences occur. Next slide. The perception of the thermal environment takes place via the femoral receptors, which sense heat and cold and can be subdivided into the peripheral temperature sensors in the skin and the central temperature sensors inside the body. The control circuit of temperature regulation first consists of the temperature sensors and the regulator in the brain. If the core body temperature deviates from its set point of approximately 37 degrees, the hypothalamus reports an error signal. The signal leads to a compensatory reaction of the effectors. The altered body temperature due to a change in heat output or heat production is measured by the sensors and sent back to the brain as a feedback signal. If the set point and the feedback signal match, no further error signal is generated. If this is not the case, the mechanism is repeated. In order to maintain the human heat balance, a distinction can be made between 4 possible physiological reactions. If the ambient temperature rises, and thus also the body temperature of the person, an increased release of heat from the body is generated in order to protect the body from possible overheating. In the first place, the variable blood vessels dilate, which increases the blood flow through the skin. The increased blood flow allows more heat to be released into the environment through convection and conduction. Maximum vasodilation occurs when a sweat secretion begins. The sweat glands are activated for the additional dissipation of heat to the environment. Through the evaporative heat dissipation, a great amount of additional heat energy can be released to the environment. In contrast, when a cold stimulus is perceived, mechanisms are initiated that retain heat in the body to counteract possible hypothermia. In the first place, a vasoconstriction, so a constriction of the peripheral vessels is induced, which reduces the blood flow and thus also the heat dissipation of the body surface to the environment. In addition to this, muscular activity can be involuntarily increased. This creates the rhythmic muscular tremor, which can increase heat production by 3 to 5 times compared to the basal metabolic rate. And in addition to these 4 possible reactions of the body, there's also the thermal neutral zone. Within this, the body is in thermal equilibrium with its environment and does not need to respond to the environment with either vasomotor activity nor with increased heat output or increased heat production. Next slide. These 4 reactions, vasodilation, sweat production, vasoconstriction, and muscular tremor, that can be triggered by external stimuli in the human body, are among the possible effects that an environment can have on a person's comfort and possibly their health. To evaluate the impact of the thermal environment on humans, the activity of the effector mechanism is assessed, since these only become active when there is a deviation from the thermal neutral state. Basically, thermal neutrality is not determined by environmental conditions or passive heat exchange, but is an individual physiological phenomenon that should be assessed on the basis of minimal vasomotor activity. Conversely, minimal vasomotor function is determined by an individual's physiological parameters, for example, their weight and height, their activity, as well as their clothing installation, and of course, their thermal environment. Within the thermally neutral zone, the body loses heat, apart from respiration, exclusively through sensible heat loss. This is understood to be heat conduction up to the body shell and the subsequent release of heat via convection and radiation. The thermal neutral zone is not exclusively determined by ambient temperature, but additionally by the skin and body core temperature, which must be in a certain ratio to each other so that only sensible heat losses occur. It also can be seen here that the thermal neutral zone varies for each person, as the sensitive heat losses are significantly changed by the clothing insulation, the posture, and the internal heat production, in addition to the physiological parameters. So knowing all of this, a total of 6 different impact zones can be distinguished on the basis of the described reactions of the human body to the thermal environment, which can be assigned to the 4 impact categories that I've shown earlier. So zone 1 describes the area in which a thermal environment has no effect on humans. Zone 2 refers to the second impact category and describes an imperceptible impact, since the body reacts to its environment, but the vasomotor processes are not consciously perceptible. Zones 3 and 4 can be assigned to the third impact category, the perceptible, comfort, relevant changes. Zones 5 and 6 stand for the last impact category and represent a change in the body that is detrimental or can be detrimental to health. Next slide. There is widespread agreement in the literature on the range in which the core body temperature must lie for thermal neutrality. However, there's no such consensus with regard to skin temperature, and a wide variety of temperature ranges can be found, with skin temperatures ranging from 28 degrees Celsius to 36 degrees Celsius. And even usually thermal neutrality is not directly referred to, but only thermal comfort. So the values for the limits of zones 1 to 6 of the core body temperature, as shown here, are taken as given in the existing literature, while the values for the limits of the skin temperature have to be determined depending on the core body temperature, as well as the environmental and individual conditions. Next slide. So unfortunately, I really do not have the time to present the complete model in its mode of operation. So we'll only briefly discuss which different models are used as a basis for calculation in the new model. So as I said, only the values for the body core temperature assumed to be constant values for the individual zones, although the values are variable. Of course, the classical heat balance equation is included in the model as a basis for calculating the skin temperature in a specific environment. All other parameters needed to determine the individual limits of these impact zones are taken from the sources that are mentioned on this slide. Next one. The entire calculation ultimately runs in a MATLAB program. So here's a rough flowchart of which variables are needed for the calculation and how they influence each other. This is intentionally kept so small because I don't want to go into detail about all the variables that go into it, but just want to give a rough overview. So therefore, here are the input data, which are on the one hand personal data such as age, gender, height, weight. On the other hand, the environmental data, which do not differ significantly from other comfort models. So it's air temperature, the radiation temperature, the air humidity, and the air speed are included as physical variables. Next slide. The output data is on the one hand the average body temperature of the individual zones, so the limits of those zones, and on the other hand, the average body temperature that would occur for a person in a certain environment, so that the result looks as it's shown on the next slide. So for the following diagrams, a constant humidity is assumed. This is justified by the fact that in most environmental conditions, the air humidity is a more constant variable in comparison to others. In constant, both the air velocity and the operative temperature are subject to greater fluctuations. With regard to the non-physical conditions, constant clothing insulation and constant heat production due to activity are also assumed. As already described, only the physiological reactions of the body are taken into account in the present method, but not the conscious adaptations to the thermal environment which would occur, for example, through a change of clothing. So in addition to a constant heat production is assumed because the person for whom the effects are to be assessed is supposed to be in a specific assessment situation in which he or she is engaged in a certain activity. So these diagrams show the results of the mean body temperature as well as the classification of the impact zones. On another note, the mean body temperature is basically a weighted average of the core body temperature and the skin temperature. So the chart on the left refers to an exemplary woman, and the chart on the right refers to a man. For both, the heat production is identical at 60 watts per square meter, and both have a clothing insulation of 0.5 CLO. In addition, a humidity of 50% applies to both diagrams, and the average temperature ranges between 15 degrees Celsius and 35 degrees Celsius, and the air velocity between 0.1 meter per second and 4 meter per second. So in a direct comparison of both diagrams, it can be seen that the thermally neutral zone is larger in the right-hand diagram, especially in cool environments. In addition, the vasoconstriction zone is larger in the right graph, whereas the person shown in the left graph would comparatively start to shiver at higher temperatures. The threshold at which the person would sweat is very similar for both. This fact is explained by the quite low heat production and rather typical summer clothing. Next slide. One before. Thank you. In the two figures on this slide, the persons are considered with the identical physiological parameters, and the relative humidity remains constant at 50%. However, for both, the heat production is increased to 100 watts per square meter and the clothing insulation to 0.8 CLO. It is clearly visible that the zone of sweating is the most represented. Also noticeable in the comparison of the two graphs is that a taller and heavier person, so the man, begins to sweat even at lower operative temperature and air velocities. The state of zeroing no longer occurs for either person. However, it is also clearly noticeable that the zone of vasoconstriction is significantly larger in the left graph, especially at lower airspeed. Consequently, the thermally neutral zone for both persons deviates from each other. Next slide. So at this point, it should be noted that an evaluation of the global thermal comfort is certainly possible with this method. However, only the physiological reactions are evaluated and not the subjective feeling of an individual person. For example, a state of sweating during an activity with a higher heat production is not to be evaluated as a purely negative effect and would not be perceived as thermal discomfort by the respective person. So all in all, the presented method not only offers the possibility to determine the mean body temperature for each possible environmental situation and for each individual person, but also to evaluate this with regard to the physiological reactions triggered in humans, as well as using this approach discussed here for evaluation. It can also be used for the planning of indoor spaces, in particular by determining in advance the order of magnitude of the physical parameters required for the maintenance of the individual person thermal neutral zone. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Carol. We need now to move to the fourth presentation about cooling spaces for a changing climate, a review of climate adaptation plans. I think Mr. Daniel Yoshida will be presenting, right?
Hello, I'm Bruna. All of you see the screen?
Yes, so Bruna de Souza will be presenting. Yes, we can see your screen. Yes, please start.
Okay. Good afternoon. I'm architect and a master candidate in environmental comfort at University of São Paulo in Brazil. Today, we are going to present our research, which is cooling places for changing climate, a review of climate changing plans. Nowadays, more than half of the world population lives in urban areas, and in Latin America, this percentage is around 84, and it's expected that this urban expansion scenario will increase in the next decades. Climate change is perhaps the most important challenge for humankind and has a stronger relation with the increase of climate extremes, such as heat waves that treats people's health around the world. Facing this condition, mitigation and adaptation measures are urgent to make urban areas more resilient, more energy efficient, and healthier. In this ongoing research aims to systematize and analyze the available climate adaptation plans around the world, bringing measures to mitigate heat stress. This research aims to summarize how cities are facing and managing climate change effects. Here we have 57 climate adaptation plans from cities around the world, and we utilize the criteria for C4 group, benefits of urban heat adaptations document published in March 2021 by C40 group. And this research aims to analyze the presence of cooling places in these climate adaptation plans. Cooling places is one of adaptation measures that is linked with public policies for urban design, greening, transport-oriented development, and many other strategies that embody the role of urban planning and design to build more resilient and healthier urban communities. Greening is one of the most cited measures in climate adaptation plans because it promotes many ecosystems services like reducing pollutions, climate regulations, and water management, protections and biodiversity, and bringing well-being to people. The criteria were proposed based on the temperature reduction potential of the actions and feasibility of implementation based on measured benefits of urban heat adaptations by C40 group as follows: cool surface found on sidewalks and roofs, and these reduce energy observation and captured as a result of the reflective capacity of the elements. Green infrastructure like urban parks, green corridors, vegetation in general. Reiterative responses planning that corresponds to the policy of making population aware of heat waves, as well as action plans upon their occurrence to mitigate the effects generated by prolonged exposures to increased temperatures. Gray urban shading structures that corresponds to structures that provide shading, whose importance comes from the reductions of the amount of solar radiation captured and stored in the urban surfaces, and therefore reducing the reduction of air and surface temperature. Next one, 6, urban water features due to their greater ability to absorb solar radiation when compared to the inert materials and to evaporate cooling. Water bodies can reduce the air temperature of the surrounding area and promote a greater thermal comfort. And finally, 7, wind corridors through convections and evaporations can generate temperature reductions. From these preliminary results of the research, it can be concluded that there is a recent movement from the development of climate adaptation plans, and most of them in developed countries. These plans aim to reduce the impacts generated by climate change and advance in the understanding of the subject and the implementation of practical measures that minimize the expected impacts. Despite this, part of the document found can be classified as primers, as they approach the topic superficially and have an education rather than a described nature. This shows that despite the large number of documents, they do not describe practical and viable actions to apply in cities. Green infrastructure, urban morphology, actions, and reductions of greenhouse gases emissions are the main topics found in climate adaptation plans. Cooling places, urban shaded with build-up structures and urban water features appears as adaptations after 2015. Before that, there were not many related topics found. And finally, in view of current demands, the urgent need to treat the public spaces for user adaptations through the design of a network of cooling places organized through the city is emphasized. cooling places must be designed in accordance with the local context and associated with a green infrastructure and urban morphology strategies in order to alleviate the thermal stress generated by climate change, especially during the heat waves. And thank you for your attention. That's all.
Thank you, Bruna, for this presentation. Prof. Hom, would you like kindly to handle the questions while I type my questions myself?
Okay, so thank you for all your presentations. So it's very nice. So do you have any question for the first presenter? So I have other questions for the another presenter. So I think we'd like to go one by one. So I didn't see the question for the first presenter. So Hanan, can you give the, do you have any question for the first presenter?
Yes, I would like to ask Prof. Mino about how representative the study is. I mean, how many buildings were involved in the study? Yeah.
Hello, Dr. Hanan. Thank you for your question. Yes, we looked at 4 buildings and over, I think, a bigger, limitation and number of buildings was perhaps the time at which we studied this was the period of February and March, which while March is really transitioning into summer in Ahmedabad, it's really not the peak of the summer. So if we want to look at shades as a resilience measure, we really need to extend the duration of the study and get into the months of May and June, and then see the deployment rates. So hopefully in the coming months, next year, we have scope and money to extend the study. But I think it was proof of concept as well to streamline our methodology, identify good case studies, and streamline calculation, and perhaps find new avenues for how to dig in deeper into the data that we collect from this type of study.
Okay, so
okay,
I also
thank you.
like to
Thank
have
you.
sorry, thank you. So I also like to have a comment or a slight question. So I didn't understand the research gap. So why you need this research? Because you have done some of the literature review, and also definition of the active and passive people. So how did you define that?
So in terms of the gap, I would say the bigger gap here is to study this behavior in a new and geographic and climate context, where I think shades are quite common in more warmer climates, and you would think that they are used more actively. But we found very few studies which were in the sort of hot and dry climate. And to study in the local context what exactly is going on, there was no data point that was available locally, and see if this can be part of a resilience measure in such a climate. And sorry, your second question, active and passive users. So right now we classified people who used at least, in terms of shade movements, if 20% of the time that people, 20% or more times that people were found to have moved their shades during the period of observation, we classified them as active and passive versus passive. And the non-users were, of course, easy to spot. They never moved them.
Okay, thank you very much. So we'd like to move in the next presenter, Niria, Professor Niria. So Professor Surup asked you the question, why is the preference in winter for being cooler? Are the homes overheated?
Probably yes. However, we noticed that it depends on the age, if they were older or not. So the main conclusion is that probably the set points temperatures, which normally in Spain in nursing homes are just set on 23 to 25 approximately, without taking into account the outdoor conditions, might not be suitable, and what we should start thinking of implementing adaptive control strategies based on outdoor conditions and or based on real needs of occupants.
Okay, thank you very much. So one more question from Dr. Saham. So what is the design practical implementation of the finding of your research? In the other word, how can we design better nursing home?
Well, it's not such focused on the design of the building per se, but design of the monitoring system and control of control systems, and also plan scheduling of activities, and so from our side. On the other side, when designing HVAC systems here in Spain, there is just this range of temperatures around 23 and 25, which is considered to be the comfortable temperature. And the idea is to focus or to have real or standard based on real needs, and then design the HVAC systems of buildings based on these real neutral temperatures or real comfort temperatures of elderly.
Okay, so we have one more question for you from the Professor Minu. So could you elaborate how much and what type of control did each of the occupant groups have on their various species?
I imagine the question is the control of their own activities, or I'm not sure about the question, but if it's about, it's true that depending on the age, there are elderly who do not have control of putting on more clothes or switching on or opening windows, and so when having shared rooms, there is no option to control these opening windows or general activities, but each resident can at least move, can ask for water if they are hot, can put on clothes, or can just decide not to do a specific activity. This is the control that elderly can do on themselves. Regarding the environment, the control is made of the facility managers, and based on each day in the morning, depending on if it's cold or hot, they just define a set point temperature, which is mainly previously defined, and there is no other adaptive measures on that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So just I have one comment for you, quick comment. So you have been the data for the thermal sensation board and the indoor temperature, right? Of course, if you bin the data, of course, the R-square, the model will improve. But sometimes the binning the data also losing the real information. So you may need to consider in future, because the slope will not change so much even you bin the data.
Yes, yes. In fact, we've got not binned data and all the data, and the results were quite similar. As you said, what we obtain is a higher R square. I just present it in this way because it was probably easier to see, but the results were quite similar when defining the slope and when defining the neutral temperature.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
So we would like to move the third presenter. So so we have one question from Peter Holzer. So can this methodology be applied to identify benchmark for the danger of the heat health impact in indoor environment, i.e. entering zone 5 to 6?
Yes, of course. It's one of the ideas to basically group people with similar physiological criteria, like children or elderly people, and to find benchmarks for those zones and for the other zones as well. So, because I'm pretty sure that it's not realistic that you can use a method for every individual person. So rather group people into groups and find benchmarks for each zone. Definitely, yes.
Okay.
I have a question to Carol.
So, yeah, please, yeah.
Yes, I'm just wondering, what makes the proposed method truly global? Because we know that the climatic and cultural background has an effect. Here I'm referring to the acclimation, genetic adaptation. How do you make sure that the method is truly global?
That's a good point. Right now, we cannot make sure about that point. So we actually only use it in like the climate where I come from, so basically Germany. So there's no adaptation to hotter or humid environments or colder environments even regarded right now. But it's a very good point. We definitely gotta consider it in the future, of course.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. So we'd like to move to the last presentation. So do you have any question? Hanan, do you have any question?
Yes, I have a question.
Yeah, please. I think we don't have
how
questions.
many, I'm interested in knowing how many documents or plans were reviewed in this study, and what is the distribution of these documents based on which climates, from where do they come basically? So, Bruna, if you can answer this question, please. I think the presenters left. Yeah.
Left? Okay.
Yes. None of them is
Daniel.
Okay. So
yes, please.
Okay, so Daniel, can you please answer this question? How many documents were reviewed, and what is the distribution of these documents climatically?
Just a moment. I think I have to him. So I think Daniel, you can do now. Yeah, please, you can talk maybe.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now it's
okay. Sure. So our study, most of our documents we analyzed are from North America and here in South America from Brazil. And so some of the climates we analyzed are from the United States, Canada. And so here in Brazil we have many types of climates. So basically it is subtropical and tropical climates we analyze. And there are also some documents from Europe and Australia and Japan also.
So you are covering like wide climatic range. I'm afraid the uncovered areas, they don't have such plans for the climate adaptation, unfortunately. Okay,
yes.
So thank you. Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, thank you.
Okay. Just I'd like to have one comment. I think you did a very good literature review. So that is very good. I think you have mentioned somewhere, maybe most of the cases is from developed country, right?
Yes.
So how you can apply it in developing country? So do you have any idea for this one?
Yeah, I think this can take Brazil as example like this, as it is under development country. So here in Brazil, we need to the participation of all stakeholders to make these plans work, and the community participation as well. And I think for the underdeveloped countries, we need to we face some kinds of problem like lack of money, lack of maybe technical knowledge, and we also can't copy the same system as the development countries. So at least here in Brazil, maybe I think it's not the better answer for now, but the participation of all stakeholders to build these climate action plans, and it is.
Okay.
This I have for now. I'm
Yeah,
a bit nervous. This is my first presentation in English. Sorry.
It's absolutely fine. It's absolutely fine.
Yeah. So I think it's a very good, and I think also the environment education also I think very good. So for example, if they build a city, it's very difficult to demolish, isn't it? So open space is decreasing, and maybe the greenery. So that one I think we have to teach the people the importance of the. I think it's also important, isn't it?
Yes. The slides where Bruna presented our work, we saw there's some greening photos of São Paulo, and there it is the rain gardens. This we know that it is a well used green infrastructure around the world, but here in São Paulo, these structures are built like in this year. I mean, the first steps are doing by now.
Yeah. So they're still at the beginnings.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So I think we have almost the time finished.
Yes, we are.
Very good session. Yeah. Thank you very much. I think we have to finish. Yeah.
Thank you all for attending.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are on time, right on time. We are supposed to finish at 12:20.
Yeah.
And it is now 12:20. So I'd like to thank Prof. Home for chairing this session. Thank you, Home, and thank you for all the presenters and for the attendees. Thank you all, and see you in the coming sessions.
Okay, so please attend in the next keynote speech session, right? So we have from the 12:35 here. So after 15 minutes, we have the keynote speech here. Okay, thank you.